Well, yay, I get to follow Dr. H. After listening to her, I'm like, oh boy, everyone can take a nap now. That's fine. Um, well, thank you for having me here. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. I have a confession to make. I truly and sincerely despise my accent. I do. And the reason that I despise my accent is because it differentiates me from everyone else to where I feel, I live, I talk, in my head, I'm like everybody else. But there are moments when I don't despise my accent. And this is one of the moments because I'm like, it's after lunch following Dr. H. They have to pay closer attention because I have an accent. So hopefully enough is not gonna be too long. Um, One of the reasons I'm so excited to be here today because as Dr. H said, whenever people are reading about you, it's a little uncomfortable, but I have no problem talking about some of the issues. One of them is I'm married to an engineer and he works on airplanes, he's worked on space shuttles, which means emotions are not his friends, not in the least bit. So, hence, me talking to you today about emotions, I thank you for being my victims because I don't get to do that at home. It's off limits. That's where we can talk about anything else. But as soon as I start talking about work or anyone or facilitating an Alzheimer's support group or Alzheimer's, I need to know that my limits are about 2 minutes and we're done. But as you heard, I really have a deep, deep desire to make a little bit of difference in our journey through our Alzheimer's journeys. And I'm no stranger to that journey because my mom just passed on September 2nd and she had vascular dementia. So I'm very familiar with all of the joys. Yes, there are joys in the journey, but I also know that we focus so much on are we doing it right? Do we have all the tools? Are we talking to them the right way? Which is all very, very, very important. And we need to know all of that, right? Did we give them the right nutrition? What did we do? Did we do something right? Did we do something wrong? What I really want to bring to our awareness, because of course, acknowledgement is always the first step to solving anything, is that we have to pay attention to our own emotions because it really starts and stops with us. And we neglect that not by choice, but because it's so complicated and the journey can be painful. So I hope, if nothing else today, I can leave you with please remember you have to recognize your own emotions and you have to take care of you because taking care of you means taking care of everyone else. So I love this saying, and it says, when emotion rise, intelligence drops. I don't know if you've experienced that, but I experience it at our office every day. We get phone calls from CEOs who have managed multi-billion dollar companies and all of a sudden mom or dad have Alzheimer's and now they're at a loss. They just don't know what to do. They actually act like they're infants just about. So it doesn't matter what personality type they are. I know we've all taken those personality types. It doesn't matter. I know for a fact that I can get behind the saying, when emotions rise, intelligence drops. So we have to remember that sometimes when we think, why? Why am I not? Why didn't I do everything I know to do? Why didn't I do this? Or why didn't this come to my mind? It's because when our emotions are heightened, we sometimes don't do everything that we need to do. And we can back it with science because it says that, there's an amygdala hijack. So it overpowers the prefrontal cortex for responsible for rational thinking. And that heightens biases. And I really I had to stop when it said that heightens biases because what happens is all of a sudden the doctors may not be doing it right. We are not doing it right. The nephew's not doing it right. The next door neighbor, the church is not doing it right. So when we start feeling these emotions, do kind of check yourself a little bit. And it has a cognitive impact on us. And what I think it does when our emotions are heightened is we choose short term rewards over long term gains. We want the pain to go away. So, why are we even discussing this? It's just knowing that, right? Knowledge is power, and knowing that we have to pay attention to the fact that when our emotions rise, our intelligence drops could help us with this. And to remember that there's an actual biological factor to it. So, I've experienced all of these feelings when my mom was going through Alzheimer's, when our clients are going through it, right? You go through denial, and denial is good sometimes. It's not always a bad thing. None of these feelings are bad. The fear, the guilt, the sadness, the helplessness, the anger. We all experience feelings, and it's okay. They're our feelings. But I'll never forget the one time when I lost my cool on my mom over the phone because I couldn't hear one more time, why do I live here? And how do I get home? And I had just left her not very long ago. And I know, again, I know that this was not her, but it just got the best of me. And I lost my cool on the phone. Mom, I don't know what else to tell you. I've told you everything I can tell you. I don't know what else to do. Well, that's the only time that I ever lost my cool on my mom in 8 months. But yet, what sticks in my mind is that I lost my cool on her. And you know why? Because Benjamin Franklin is so right. Whatever is begun in anger ends in shame. So if we know that and we can keep the shame to minimal, then we're better off because it's natural for us to feel these things. It's okay. Um, and I've learned to forgive myself because I'm like, okay, in 8 months, oh, it got the best of me once, but what could I have done differently? What could I have done differently? Maybe one of the things that we can do is to acknowledge that feelings are something you have and it's not something you are because during the journey it gets so muddled. You start feeling badly and all of a sudden these feelings become you, but they're not you. They're just something you have. You're not anger, you're not sadness. It's just something you have. And if you can separate yourself from those feelings, then when they come and they go, it's not so devastating. So the objective is to not have them be devastating to you. The objective is to know they're going to come and they're going to go, but to not have them be devastating to you because they can be if you let them. So, what could I have done wrong whenever I lost my cool with my mom? I think to give myself a little space and to remember that regulating my emotion is not about controlling them, but it's about choosing how I respond. I could have chosen to respond differently to my mom. And you guys know these tools I'm preaching to the choir here. But really, the most important thing for me is between her stimulating me and my response, there's a space. And if we can take anything away from today, it's knowing that that space is really precious. So if you give yourself a space before you respond, if you give yourself a little time, because in that space, you can find more freedom, you can find more power to choose how you respond. And that could be an area of growth for us throughout the journey, especially for those of us who are dealing with someone who may be having Alzheimer's for, 5, 7, 8, 10 years. It's probably a really good exercise to keep in mind. Just remember the space. And one way I remember it after that one episode is I always think of a spaceship in my head. So every time she stimulated my emotions, I would think of the spaceship and I would stop and I would choose how I'm going to respond. And I know that you guys have all of these tools that are available to you. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, good. I'm glad you're not my husband and you're not going to cut me off in 2 minutes. But please feel free to stop me and please feel free to ask any questions that you have. I know it may seem straightforward, but If you have any kind of an input or if you have anything to add to this or any questions, I'm really happy to stop and ask any question and answer any questions you have. So yeah, it's really easy to say, right? I know. Again, firsthand, I know it's easier said than done. It is. But you know what I really learned more than anything throughout this journey is there is no shame in seeking help because sometimes we feel, I honored my mom and continue to honor my mom on a daily basis. But honoring my mom meant that I actually seek help. So I will tell you that sometimes we feel that somehow we have to wear the superhero cape here. We have to overcompensate for this travesty, for this tragedy that happened in our life. But I think I would urge you to keep that super cape on a hanger by the door because there is no shame in seeking help. And I did. I practiced what I preached. I preached that all the time. Get help, take care of yourself. As soon as it became really obvious that my mom could no longer live in her own home because it was no longer safe for her to live in her own home, I walked into my partner's office and we started Purview Life 17 years ago. We've worked together for 20 years. And I walked into her office and said, Susan, you and I have worked together for nearly 20 years. We've never, thank God, knock on many, 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 many woods. We have never ever been cross with each other. I said, but I'll tell you what, will be cross with you if you don't let me hire you as my care manager. And she just looked at me and I'm like, I am really that serious. I need help. So sure enough, I hired my good friend and my partner Susan to be my care manager. And she's the one who actually went to my house and told my mom, we're going to go to lunch. And she took her to the assisted living facility. They toured it. And my mom said, you're not going to leave me here, are you? And Susan's like, let's just try it for a little bit. If I would have been there and my mom would have said, you're not going to leave me here, are you? I probably have forgotten everything I told you about and walked out the door with her. So it was great for me to be courageous enough to ask for help because 3 days later, we went to visit my mom. I teared up as soon as I saw her. I walk up to her and she's like, come meet my new friends. Look at this beautiful place that Susan showed me. I'm like, okay, great. So it worked out beautifully. And talk about managing my own emotions and expectations. And that's another thing. It's not just about emotions, it's about our expectations. I expected my mom, when I saw her, to just be completely miserable, and it was not so. And I think managing expectations is really huge because we sometimes forget that they can't do some of the stuff that they've been able to do. So when I talk about emotions, I should have really put down expectations as well because our own expectations can get in the way of a better journey. 3 days, 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. So please remember, ask for help. It really is okay because it is honoring them to give them the best that they need and that they deserve. And you need the help. I needed the help. I can't tell you what a relief it was that I didn't have to do all of that. 3 days, it was great. And my mom and I would have the best visits when I would go see her at the assisted living facility. And I didn't have to try and manage all of these complex emotions because I seek help. 3 days, why is it okay to get help? Because a lot of times, and 3 days, let me tell you, getting help from my children was no help at all. Because my oldest daughter was in such denial because she loved my mom so much that after it was undeniable that my mom was really as advanced in her disease stage as she was, Michelle came up to me and said, Mom, I'm really sorry for pummeling you. I said, that's a very good verb that you used because you did pummel me. So sometimes I know you gotta, not only is it important to ask for help, it's also important to ask for the right help. That doesn't mean, okay, let me just tell you, I know this is a bragging moment. Michelle, who pummeled me, is a chemical engineer with a degree from Wharton and MBA. So talk about when emotions rise, intelligence drops. She was the perfect example of it. 3 days, she didn't have the skill sets to, or the emotions, or she's never been in that space before. When you've never been in a space before, you really don't have the tools. I don't care how competent you are. So when I tell you and encourage you to ask for help, make sure you ask for the right help, right? Because if that person is emotional about who you're trying to get help for yourself and for them, it's not going to be help. It's going to be more of a deterrent than anything. So asking the right help, and I urge you to have someone more objective, no matter whether that someone is a professional like ourselves, or if you feel that truly your next door neighbor could be objective, or your pastor, or whomever it is, because objectivity is so huge. So objectivity gets everybody on the same page. So if nothing else, if this is the beginning of your journey or the middle or the end, and you're stuck and you have a little bump in the road, get a consultation. Because what happens, what I found out, and I did that, again, everything I'm telling you is not just preaching, it's actually I did it. So the first thing I did, I knew two of my children were behind me, two were against me, and my colleagues here will attest to the fact of how devastating that was for me. Never expected two of my children to not necessarily be against me. That's not the right wording, to not be on the same page. So what did I do? I called again my partner. She's a nurse and she's objective. And I said, we need to have a consultation. And you know what really became evident when she was doing that consultation with us is what we tend to do is we tend to fight for our position. That's what we tend to do. This is my position. This is your position. So she was able to turn that around. And instead of fighting for our position, she was able to have us all remember to work toward a common goal, which is what is best for my mom. How do we give her the best life possible? So do remember that when you get help or if you have any kind of conflict in the family, stop and think, are we fighting for position here or are we fighting for a goal? And if you do that, then you postpone avoiding. How many of you don't make a decision because A, you don't know what to do, or B, everyone is not agreeing on what to do, right? And because no one's agreeing on what to do, you tend to kind of take the back seat a little and then you don't make that decision. Well, what happens when you don't make that decision? What if I would have delayed moving my mom? She was wandering the streets at 3 a.m. in Tulsa when it was 5 degrees out in her robe and her slippers. There was no more delaying. I had to get everyone on the same page. I had to get that consultation. We had to move forward. Had I not done that, I promise you, because I do love my children and I do respect them, I probably would have postponed moving her a little longer, even though I knew better, right? So try and get everybody on the same page. And if that everybody means you and you, then that's you and you, right? So here's it. And another thing that I learned, it's really interesting what you learn through the journey, is that objectivity didn't mean that we have to treat all sides equally because sometimes you just can't. It just means that we give each side a hearing. And Christiane Amanpour said that. So, what happens when you ask help with someone who's objective? You typically get an approach to complex situation with fresh, unbiased perspective. I mean, that's huge, right? My mom pushed my emotional buttons. It didn't push my care manager's emotional buttons. It was okay. So these approaches are really important to a success. And you know, the doctor said earlier, look, you come and do this test with me, it's $2,000. It's a lot of money. And I get that. But long-term care is more money. So while I'm urging you to get help, please do remember that sometimes some of that help is going to cost a little bit of money or a lot of money or medium money. But at the end, I really do believe you'll be glad that you got it. Because again, the objectivity does help. And it helps everybody to stay in their role. Just like I was saying earlier, I didn't walk out the assisted living facility with my mom because somebody objective was helping her adjust. Um, a- and it brings calm to the storm. This is a storm. Let's just face it. Sometimes it's a little thunderstorm. Sometimes it's a tornado. Sometimes it's a hurricane. So, having the objective person really can bring calm to the storm. And it helps everybody keep grounded. Again, in theory, it sounds really good, but honestly, if you practice it enough, it really, really does help. So again, I said earlier, be careful who you ask help from. If that person can also have expertise, whether it's the Alzheimer's Association, whether it's a care manager, whether it's a social worker that's really well versed in this, it's really, really important. Um, because what happens with somebody who has expertise, they can help you avoid unnecessary procedures. They can help you avoid duplication of services. They have a deep understanding of needs leading to better outcomes, and they can become your advocate. I think one of the most undervalued role that an objective helper has is that people forget how important advocacy is, because even the doctor was talking about how many times did you hear her during her speech say they weren't helping me, the healthcare system wasn't helping, they were telling me to stop doing something that was beneficial to to my patient. You could tell that she wanted to branch out because sometimes she was doing something that didn't resonate with her. And you can't help the healthcare system. It's the Titanic, it's bigger than we are. So, getting an advocate would really be helpful because they help with every stage of the journey. And I know that I had an advocate because, as I told you, moved mom to assisted living. 8 months later, mom fell down. We don't know why she fell down. I get a call from the facility saying she fell down. I said, okay. They said, we're going to take her to the emergency room just to check her out. She seems just fine. I said, okay, great. Take her. I'm on my way to an appointment, called our office. One of my nurses went to stay with her. Well, they were just going to leave mom in her confused dementia state in the hallway. And my care manager, my nurse is like, no, we're not doing that. I'm not. So she stood there, advocated, make sure my mom had everything that she needed. I can't imagine my mom being in the hospital without an advocate at that time. It would have been horrible. And, you know, um, so it reduces the guesswork. I don't know. If you've never fixed the car, sewed a pillow, done anything in your life, you go do it for the first time. Even with YouTube, you're always like, am I doing this right? And really going through this journey is no different. So having an advocate reduces the guesswork, not to mention the cost, time, stress, and doing it right the first time. So I think if you get in the habit of getting help, in whatever form that is for you, everybody's situation is different. Asking for help for you is different. I think you'll realize that you were going through some unnecessary suffering. Life is hard enough. We don't need to have unnecessary suffering because A, we're not managing our own emotions and expectations, and B, because we're not managing them, our intelligence has dropped because our emotions are high, and now we're not asking for help when it makes perfect sense to ask for help. So, um, so life is tough enough. We don't need to make it any tougher. And I'll tell you what. You know how I told you I have this visual of a spaceship? Anytime I find myself being a little stuck, I always remind myself, you can't see your picture when you're in a frame. Imagine yourself being in a picture frame. You can't see the picture. So a lot of times what happens when you get help also is the picture becomes a little bit clearer. It is, right? I mean, I have my favorite family picture in my head, and I always picture that going, yeah, if I'm in it, I can't see it. So I know you guys know this, but I think it's really important because sometimes you don't need to be instructed, you just need to be reminded. And these are some statistics of what is the cost if we don't really pay attention, right? So, high level of depression, 40% of people who are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's, they have higher rate of depression. And a lot of times they end up in intensive care. Anxiety, 44% significant emotional stress. And I will tell you, I experienced it. And without the help that I seek, I think the 44% is pretty mild. Increased risk of cognitive decline. Oh, good. So we get to have cognitive decline while we're caring for someone with cognitive decline. And sleep disturbance. We all know, especially if they start sundowning. We don't get enough sleep, so it weakens our immune system. And physical strain. So many people complain now of backache, you know, hip dislocation, include heart attacks. So that's 70%. That's a pretty high percentage. And I always, and this is, we're getting towards the end, and I'm going to stop and ask for any questions. But how do we help ourselves? We talked about all of this. And I just said, when we're trying to please someone, we often forget that we have choices. It is so true. Think about it. If you just stop and think about it, if you're a people pleaser and you're trying to please somebody, all of a sudden, some logical choices just go off the go off of your radar screen. If you really stop and think about it. So what can you do? And again, I know it's easier said than done, but think about it. Like 10 minutes. There are apps like Calm, Insight Timer. They're often, guided meditation sessions, or just taking a moment to have a deep breath, just to take deep breaths. Journaling, I know I'm not really good at it, but every time I do it, I think, why don't I do this more often? Journal, it really helps. It helps help you process your thought and find perspective on this journey. If you just journal a little. And I'm a big advocate of professional therapy, especially when we're going through this journey. Why not? Can I ask you, why wouldn't we do that? If we needed a cast because we broke a leg, would we say, I don't know, I don't think I should go see the doctor? And I think when we're going through heartache and hard times and all of the emotions that I stated earlier, why not go get help? There is no shame again, no shame in getting help. And of course, there's also life care management, which you probably have never heard of, and that's okay. But life care management is basically like when you go build a house, right? You hire a general contractor. Why do we hire a general contractor? Because that general contractor is really familiar with all subcontractors. They know how to manage the electrician, the plumber, the cabinet installer. And all you have to do when something goes wrong, when you don't like something, when you don't like the color of the walls, you're not going to have to talk to the subcontractor. You talk to the general contractor, and they will make sure they fix everything. So, life care management, although it does, we do have nurses and social workers, and yes, healthcare is a big part of it. But honestly, it's more life centric. And if you can imagine someone just helping you manage that whole journey and help you manage the whole life, it's also very, very helpful. So I wanted to end on a funny note because we talked about some pretty heavy stuff today. And I saw this cartoon and I couldn't help it. I had to put it here. So it says, so the bills are washed, the laundry is paid, the clothes are in the oven, and the last load of dinner is in the dryer. Wow, who says I can't multitask? So this is our life, right? When we deal with somebody. that when we're going through this journey. And I just really want, I know that a lot of the stuff we talked about may sound a little ambiguous and it may sound a little bit out there, but I really encourage you to kind of reflect back a little bit on what we talked about and see if that can fit into your life and see if it can fit into your journey. Because I promise if you do let it fit into your journey, it'll make your life a lot easier. So my time is up and I thank you for yours. Any any questions at all? Anything that you have to add? I know I'm not the doctor. I'm as soon as like she was inundated with questions, I'm like, I'm gonna get none. I just know it because what she had to say is so much more practical and tangible. What I'm talking about is a little bit more intangible, but I promise you it's no less important because your emotional health is tied to your physical health, as you well know. So don't discard it as being a topic of intangibility. I don't know if there's such a word, but I just made it up maybe. Um, just do know that it really is just as important because the two are tied together. Any questions? Anything you have to add? I I so I so understand. I really do. And I know what you mean. It'd be interesting to see is when we think there is no space, and I'm not saying you're wrong. Please understand, I really, really feel for you. But have we practiced it enough? It's like everything else, right? In life, if we haven't practiced it enough, we think there is no space. But maybe if you just at least give it a try and see, and I'm not saying it'll be successful, non successful. I'm not saying in judgment. I'm just saying if you think it's worth a try after this talk, then perhaps it could be helpful for you. Any question? I love what Maya Angelou says when you know better, you do better. So maybe we know a little bit better today. And whatever that means for you, if it means walking away for a minute, if it means picturing that spaceship, if it means taking 10 deep breaths, it's hard to believe there is no space for 10 deep breaths at least. And the outcome may not be different right off the bat because, like everything in life, it's a process. And just the first time you try it may not be successful. But if you exercise that muscle enough, that perhaps it can be helpful to you. Yes, ma'am. But I think, Betsy, what makes it complicated even more so is when we try to put ourselves in their shoes, sometimes we want to remember the old them, right? So when we try to put ourselves in their shoes, sometimes subconsciously, I wanted my mom to be the mom pre dementia, right? And then I'd have to remind myself. And again, here we go. And it sounds like it's so much work for us to manage emotions and expectations. But believe me, the cost versus the benefit is huge. I found that the benefit was so much more than the cost of doing it, right? So that's one thing to kind of like a pitfall I had to watch for. Wait, wait, wait. She's not the mom that can do this anymore. So putting myself in her shoes in her new you is really challenging because we're not in that space. So yeah, it just gets so complicated. And that's why I said, get help. Life is tough enough. Any questions? Also, it's kind of like the anticipation of doing it is actually worse than the actual doing it. Like, how many people love going to the dentist? I know I hate going to the dentist. And the anticipation of going for like 2 days is so much worse than actually is like, oh, that's it. That wasn't that bad. And I'm not saying it won't be that bad because sometimes it can be. But even if it's bad for a short term pain for long term gain, you just have to kind of know that sometimes it's your anticipation. Like, I never thought my mom would say, come meet my friends. Look at this beautiful place that I'm in. She was the most independent woman. She immigrated to the States when she was 27, got a job at Ford Motor Company on the assembly line, never got remarried, had her own house, her own everything, helped me with my family and my children. Her being in assisted living, I thought would be the death sentence for her. And yet I was shocked. But like you, I didn't want to do it, but I knew I had to. And once it was done, it wasn't nearly what I thought it would be. Anything else? Anyone else has anything to add or ask or I hope this was helpful to you guys. I really, really do. And just in closing, I found opportunities with my mom because, I described the strong, independent woman. She became a little bit more vulnerable to me. And that actually strengthened our relationship. So you just don't know what can happen. You have to find these little add ons that are unexpected and that are really helpful. But again, thank you so much for your time. I see that yes, ma'am. I know. That's funny because my mom called me mom too. And I would take her to my house when we would have family dinners. And by the time it was dusk, she was like, "Who's taking me back? Who's taking me back?" Hmm. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak here today.